to another episode of HR and Payroll 2.0. I'm Pete Tiliakis, and as always, I'm joined by the legendary Julie Fernandez. Welcome, Julie.
Thanks so much, Pete.
Yeah, good to have you. And we have company this week. I'm so excited. Sylwia Korhonen is here, world-renowned global payroll expert, as I like to call her. I know she is a transformation pro, and today she is the global payroll transformation leader at Fresenius Medical Care. So welcome, Sylwia. It's so exciting to have you.
Hi, Pete. Hi, Julie. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, thank you, thank you. We are. I know I follow your thought leadership online. I love the perspectives that you have. I know you're in the thick of global payroll transformation. I know it's not your first rodeo, as we would say here in America, and so I'm excited to learn from you and share with what you're doing out there in the space. So excited to have you.
Same here.
Absolutely.
First of all, tell us what you do. Tell us where you do it, and we'd love to know about your year. How's it been? What do you got? What do you got going on?
2023 has been very fulfilling. I've been focused on creating global governance, looking at strategic planning into the years to come. I've also been focused on growing the team and really preparing for transition work that is going to fall across 2024, and also starting to look at compliance. So there's a lot of exciting launches next year and a lot of good standards to come.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Hey,
Sorry, go ahead, Julie.
when you introduced Sylwia right away, you mentioned not the first rodeo, right? And I think that even though we've had a little chance to get to know you, Sylwia, it would be great for our listeners to also know, like, what other rodeos do you have in your background?
Yeah, you've been there, done that.
Sure.
Yeah.
So fully my background, is with psychology. I was always very passionate about social and organizational psychology and really group dynamics. So falling into HR has been very natural to me. I started off in the field with supporting UK and Ireland as well as Poland, and then slowly seeing, how complex stakeholder management is. I recognized payroll as if you will, like a very exciting field because it's so critical. It is so highly skilled and such a complex discipline. And as you both know, once you fall into payroll, there's no going back. So that's been my way to payroll. And one of the first kind of takes in payroll was of course operations, supporting regular, if you will, work, and then slowly diving into global projects, implementations, mergers, acquisitions, and starting to create a large scale impact and driving transformation efforts. And up to this date, I have worked on 15 country transitions and implementations, and just been enjoying creating impact for companies with a huge footprint.
What keeps you here, Sylwia? What makes you stay around payroll?
The crazy question.
That's a great
now
question.
That you found your way.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the most fulfilling part is seeing efficiencies and sustainable change. So really changing the ways of work and creating value to the organization. It's nice to see, enhance, for instance, employee experience. It's really nice to see lean processes. So I think seeing those fruits of labor is something that just it's so incredible and special.
Oh
to
yeah,
me.
and lots of opportunities for efficiencies, as we all
Of
very
course.
much know. But one other thing I wanted to ask, I know you might have some more, Julie, too. But someone asked me this the other day, and I'm just curious from your vantage point, right? You're a global leader. You're out there on the tip of the spear, transforming an organization. Like, how would you describe what 2023 was like as an organization operating, but also going through this change?
So I think 2023, especially kind of when I look externally, there's been so many kind of changes in the space. Of course, maybe just focusing on EU's AI Act or UK's AI regulatory framework that comes around, seeing already discussions around stricter internal controls, around risk assessments, and kind of preparing for 2024 and the adoption through 2026. This is something that I've truly felt, discussed within the organization. I see a lot of shift in 2023 from, let's say, a regular, if you will, payroll stance to a focus on financial well-being. There's always been earned wage access as a large topic, but I feel like right now I'm starting to see a lot of vendor partnerships with benefit platforms. And this is, again, something that there's discussions around. And how can we leverage that technology or those partnerships? One more piece that I've really kind of spotted across the industry as well as the organization is kind of how payment rails are seen and whether this is something that is pitched further or whether it is something that is seen fully external. So I think there's been a lot of focus on that, especially seeing suppliers dig into that space.
Well, Pete, that second area, the payment space, probably resonates to you particularly.
Yep.
I know when Sylvia, when you're talking about the partnerships with the different benefits platforms, I think that's mirrors a lot of our experience, right? We often find that the global payroll type projects lead you to total reward type projects or vice versa, right? In this environment where there's so much talent. So it's interesting that you've seen that as a practitioner in what you're doing. And I also think it was really interesting, that you introduced your last year's role as dealing with global governance. And I was just wanted to ask that,
Mhm.
did governance come first? Because so many people start diving into transition and things. And so I just wanted to understand if you were actually starting with governance and preparations, or if it was coming here in the tail end of some big transformation.
That's a really great question. So, absolutely, my take and kind of our strategic leadership here is to start off with governance, to define, roles and responsibilities, to truly define that utopian end state, but also creating a framework of what are our controls, what are our standard processes, and then finding, local or regional deviations. So, creating governance, understanding touch points, manual interferences across also teams, and kind of defining our stakeholders. I think it's a really good baseline to later define and kind of seek efficiencies. So absolutely, global governance and kind of defining the roles as well as potentially looking at workforce planning as something that I typically start off with prior to really undertaking any transformation initiatives, as again it really supports then strategic planning.
Yeah, that's so cool. I mean, we knew when we got introduced that we were going to geek out on payroll and payroll transformation and specifically on strategy, right? So I'm like, oh,
Mhm.
well, why wouldn't you start there? Because, global payroll strategy is something, you're known for and that we know you for. So very cool. Well, it might not surprise folks. Like we always start with kind of like a framework of things we want to talk with. And with Celia, like we're like off and running in many different directions without even thinking
Oh, I have so
about a
many
framework,
questions.
right? Celia, one of the things like Pete and I being US based, that can be an advantage and a disadvantage. And that's oftentimes where it's the headquarters that drives the strategy, right? So I just wanted to give you a chance and ask a little bit about the global operations knowledge and experience. I mean, it feels like it's so much easier and more common when you're coming out of EMEA, right, than coming from the US, where we talk a lot and we do a lot around the strategy, but maybe a lot of folks that are leading the global payroll strategy haven't really gotten that much that much global experience under their belt.
Or don't have a strategy.
Yeah, or don't have a strategy.
And absolutely. And just touching on your experience with Workday Rising, right? There's so many kind of opportunities, and I feel like there's significantly maybe more conferences within the US to align and really seek that expertise. And I do think, strategic planning within the, if you will, headquarters of the US is maybe more defined. However, just maybe speaking about Workday, right? Just as a system itself, that is something, right, that is very established in Europe and it is visible across all organizations. However, since it is, well, let's say, if you will, Workday payroll native to Canada, US, UK, France, right? I feel like that is something that is not yet prevalent within Europe, and there are so many different competing software systems or service providers that really dominate the market. I feel like overall the landscape is in Europe is so
Mhm.
fragmented and there's so many products that are targeted for small, mid, maybe large markets, and there's so many aggregators, which I guess mirrors the landscape. And I feel like companies in Europe, they often see global expansion. There's so many acquisitions. And I think that overall, there just seems to be this need of more than payroll to the payroll solutions within Europe. So I see value being placed on, employer of record services, on the scalability of the project. Of the product, and overall maybe legal consultancy. So it seems that Europe is pretty unique because it is so fragmented, and maybe there's just so much emphasis on, for instance, collective bargaining agreements that really steers away from being dominated by a true market leader. That's my personal thought. What do you think, Pete, Julie?
Well, I'll jump in and just say when I'm working with any company, but European companies in particular, or working with IT folks as part of an evaluation, strategically, there's a tendency by some buyers in the market to look at Workday and kind of count the number of countries that are native in the product and count that as, how robust, use that as a reflection of how robust the product is or where or how you have to approach that. And it feels a bit short-sighted just because Workday, which you were just talking about, they have a whole different approach to connecting different countries, right? And so, if the approach is count how many countries get listed in an RFP, then Workday's going to, have like 4 or however many, right?
Correct.
And it doesn't reflect. And if that is a ding, or if that is a count against them, then you're really not understanding, the way that they approach connections and how that's different from those that are trying to build a native modules. So it's a tricky space, and it's why it's so exciting to talk to people like you, Sylwia.
Yeah, and there's more than one way of solving it now, right? You don't have to go about it necessarily any one specific way, but you're absolutely right. The integration is, especially for global payroll, it's absolutely vital for it to be top notch, right? Leading edge of the innovation. That tends to be one of the areas where, whenever you do look at solutions, when there's a degraded customer experience, it does tend to point to often their own lack of usage or engagement of the platform, or the willingness to change. But more importantly, integrations typically are a key area where it's not meeting expectations. And I find that a lot, especially across payroll, where it can surface itself very, very obviously. But I think that all of the platforms that are out there now are really getting to becoming almost integrations as a service. And I think that, they can plug and play pretty much everywhere, which is beautiful. That's the beauty of the API. So
Yeah. Hey, so Sylvia, I kind of feel like we started with global experience with payroll, which you have boatloads of, right? And we know we want to talk about global payroll strategy itself. So, so how did your journey go from your own hands-on to global payroll strategy?
It's a really good question, and it's very hard for me to pinpoint the exact moment when I recognized that my role truly shifted to strategy. It feels like everything naturally fell into place after seeing overall how kind of procurement initiatives started appearing, or when I started communicating expected cost reductions, or after communicating to stakeholders the transformational efforts and seeing that enhanced employee experience and recognizing, for instance, the increased compliance controls. So I think that were the times maybe where my shift started focusing also on quality assurance and looking at metrics and comparing various countries on a global level. I think those were those trigger points for me, and then simply it just needed a
Yeah, right.
label. But I think I can say that the first time when I really felt that payroll is strategic is creating a formal framework and a formal plan.
I mean, I know we're going to have folks that are that are listening that are going to ask, like, what is strategy when it comes to global payroll? How do you even define that? Because it's not like
Yeah.
you can say one provider equals, a global payroll provider equals global payroll strategy. So, what sorts of things would you, would you say you would point people to look at or think about as being the strategic aspects of bringing global payroll to the firm?
So I would say that a payroll strategy, it's always composed of 3 items. It's always systems, processes, and people frameworks. And it should be always derived from the organization's values, and it should echo the objectives of our leaders. I think the appropriate kind of strategic planning should span across 3 to 5 years, and it really should then define the governance plans and the transformation that is set ahead.
Yeah, awesome. Music to
yeah,
your ears, right, Pete? What are you thinking?
yeah, I think I'm finding that the people part of this is becoming harder and
Yeah.
harder. Right. I think that's why, when you listen to the providers that I work with, you're seeing the managed services escalate. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that I think folks are looking at their strategies and going, hey, we don't think we're going to have the people or the expertise or can develop the people or the expertise, which is very concerning, right? We have to protect this profession. So I was having conversations today with ADP, and they were talking about some of the ways in which they're starting to, leverage some of their knowledge to transfer that to their practitioner clients and teach at the country level payroll, right? And I think that's really, really important. And we're going to need more of that out there to develop and curate this talent.
Yeah. So going from talent, the talent and getting more folks engaged and more folks involved, right, is a big part of our own maybe personal mission, right? And this podcast.
Yeah. We're not all growing up aspiring to grow up to payroll,
It's
right?
it's a windy road that comes from somewhere and leads you to this weird place. But it also means that we see stakeholders from like coming from more different areas than probably any other functional area in HR. So whether it's, your IT folks or finance or shared services or local operations, I mean, the stakeholder roadmap for payroll, especially global payroll, is probably the most complex of almost anything I've seen out there. How do you navigate that, Sylwia? What do you see in that area?
I always say that payroll does not exist in a vacuum. We should not be seen as a siloed function. The closest stakeholders that I've always partnered with would be those who either supply, of course, data into payroll or who leverage payroll data for further internal needs and analytics. So those would be, to me, finance, HR, as you've named, benefits, talent acquisition. But I think there's three that I would consider maybe more strategic, if you will. So partnering with information technology, information security, and procurement are the functions where I think maybe payroll is a little bit less visible to. And I think that's where we can, derive investments from, ensure that we have appropriate compliance, and truly get their buy-in for our sourcing strategies. So I think frequent checkpoints with those three is always something that is on my mind and as a priority.
Yeah, maybe it even happens more naturally that way because IT and finance seem to hit, kind of global before HR does. It's a little more complicated, in HR. And so oftentimes they see more global stakeholders popping up and having roles coming from IT and finance before HR gets his act together. I don't know if that's fair or not, but I'm going to say it. All right. Well, the other thing I was thinking of, when we were thinking about having this conversation, Sylwia, is just global payroll conversations often start or seem to focus on the provider of choice or the implementation. And so, it was one of the things that struck me most when Pete was introducing you is that, you're starting with the framework, which feels like the right way to go about things, but like almost never the way that happens, right?
Uh-huh.
What sorts of things, create the wake up call, or
Right.
what would you mention about getting
Yeah.
folks engaged in the right capacity there?
So perhaps my experience is a little bit particular because I have worked in companies of 90,000 employees plus, but the level of investment needed to reach that utopian state where we have implemented, software or consolidated vendors, it just takes time. And I think that wake up call is identifying that risk of aggressive regional or global system rollouts often, in my opinion, tends to, well, have a negative effect on losing processes or people along the way, or creating, again, a change that is not going to be sustainable and won't be adopted within the organization. And I think that it just takes time to create a consolidated payroll landscape, and creating, of course, governance prior and after to support it and enhance it I think it's the bread and butter of payroll itself.
Yeah. Sylwia, how much does what you're doing in your role is actually change management, and how involved do you get in leading a lot of that?
That's a really great question. I can absolutely say that something that I like to label as payroll branding, internal payroll branding, and kind of having that visibility across various functions is a large part of my job. I think gaining and educating our stakeholders of, what is the impact, what are our areas of cross collaboration is very important. And change management in terms of, again, pitching new investments, pitching efficiencies, and pitching that goal end state, it's a very big part of my job.
Yeah, I think that's part. I think that's going to be a key skill for the leaders of the future in payroll. When you look at what the role is going to become, I think change agent is going to be a very, very important role.
Absolutely. And I think it also comes down to pitching what is relevant to that person. So it's, having a payroll lens, but really to translate it into, for instance, cost saving, time saving. Yeah. It's translating into employee experience. Not all efficiencies that we have internal within payroll are relevant to all of the stakeholders. So I think it is reformulating and recognizing the additional benefits that we bring forward with systems, and kind of communicating that change, but that is relevant to the person that we are speaking to.
Yeah, it's great.
I love the fact that you kind of started that whole conversation with it takes time, because so often, folks come to wanting to address something about their payroll globally, and it becomes an exercise to wedge every country in, to something new or different, or a provider within, usually a 12 to 18 month period of time. And as you pointed out rightly, that just doesn't leave a lot of time for getting the framework right, right, and doing it thoughtfully, and
Yeah.
getting engagement, and and bringing people along for the ride is feels like it's missing so often.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you're doing your frameworks and you're planning and you're kind of setting the stage for this, Sylvia, we have folks that ask us all the time, where does payroll sit in the organization, or where should it sit? And, for that top global payroll role, like, what do they really own? Are they just a process owner without any real direct budget or headcount responsibilities? And everyone does it differently, right? But what have you experienced there? What do you think? And does it even matter?
In my personal opinion, because of the volume and the complexity of external partnerships that payroll holds, overall, the technology investments and how critical the function is to the business, I think we should always hold our own budget so that we have that accountability and we have that operational oversight, and we're able to check those efficiencies, benchmark ourselves, and really have appropriate decision making. However, when it comes to that question of should it fall under HR or finance, to me, there's less importance in it, because I think it's more of a question of what is the influence that payroll holds and the governance model of working with those stakeholders directly. And of course, I can say that seeing across different organizations, whether payroll falls under finance or HR, there's going to be different targets communicated, and there's going to be different ideas and implementation, for instance, needs or focus areas for transformations. But what I do see across all businesses is that the organizational structure of payroll itself often mirrors the business landscape. So let's say if you would have a company that has regional or maybe a legal entity split, and they have various supporting structures that operate on that level. Payroll would also be set up to support the business in that need. And I think personally that is very efficient. So I think when we kind of look at payroll, when we look at HR, sitting under HR or finance, I think I try to look at a larger structure and just see it as a people function or a finance function as a whole, and how that is set up versus the business.
That's a great way to look at it. Oftentimes when I'm working with companies that are looking for a provider or providers to manage this with, it's so hard to explain to them how important it is. Whether you take a large country, small country approach, or a regional approach, if your ownership and your organization is heavily driven by regional leaders, then that's the solution, right? It needs to more strongly mirror that organization, because that's how you're going to govern. And it's tricky, and it's different for every organization. So thank you for saying that. Pete, anything along those lines? Otherwise, I wanted to move to start asking some questions about the future of payroll and where it's headed.
No, no. I think that the payroll, the HR or finance thing is going to forever be right. It's going to be. I always call it payroll's chicken or the egg conundrum. Which one first? But really, yeah. I mean, I think you're right. It's 100% about what's best for that organization and how it's structured. And I also think about how it's also in the maturity and the way in which they've structured their delivery model sometimes can influence part of that as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's no one size fits all is my short answer.
Absolutely. That's what makes it so tricky, right? And why folks have such a hard
Yeah.
time getting to anything that feels like they, like, hey, we did something
Yep.
great.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
Sylvia, you mentioned even when you were introducing yourself, some of the, cool kind of newer trends and advancements and things that you're involved in and interested in. And I can't wait to hear a little bit more about, where you think payroll is heading, what's on your radar, and what are you hoping to really get to dive into here in your next year?
Yeah. So I think one piece is, of course, at the top of my mind at all times now. It's, of course, the AI Act. Yeah. And what is that impact going to be? I'm very mindful of kind of contractual clauses. I think the barrier to entry for market entry for new providers may be higher. I think with the new legislation, with payroll probably being placed right into high risk category, I think we're going to see maybe less technology advancements or quick technology advancements. I see there's going to be stricter controls. And I want to see how the organizations are kind of separated on a company level versus plopped into ongoing data intake stream from vendors. So I'm very mindful of that and kind of mindful in terms of contracting for anything that is kind of AI driven. So that is something that is on my mind.
Hey, I'm sure you have more, but I wanted to pause there for just a second because honestly, I don't know that this was as high on my radar as it is now that we're talking about it. And we've been talking a lot about just AI overall and the governance and regulation prep for that, but I hadn't really spent much time thinking about it from the UK AI regulatory act that's happened. And I don't know if that fits more tightly or if it triggers things with works councils and with other areas of compliance in the UK and in the European Union? Anything there to know about?
Yeah, the EU Parliament just put something out recently. I tweeted about it the other day, Sylvia, where it's kind of like GDPR. It's like a percentage of, depending upon the type of failure, whether it was a data failure or malicious failure or something. I think the way they use the term they use, there's percentages of total revenues can be fined. Do you know that? You know the one I'm talking about?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
hmm And I think, right, we're going to be again looking at rollouts and kind of country adoptions across well,
Yeah.
country or technology adoptions across the years to come. So it's going to be very interesting to see kind of what is approved and yeah.
Yeah, I just hope it doesn't suppress innovation is all, right? I know we definitely need to go slow. We need to protect people, we need to protect data, but I just hope we don't, suppress, the innovation and the progress and acceleration of what can be really, really impactful
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I cut you off before you had a chance to list some other things. So let's like hop into the next one.
Pete, I think this one is one that always comes to my mind and it makes me think of prior comments and discussions with you. I'm always intrigued in seeing the concept of real time payroll. I feel like that is our holy grail. I think it is a change of mindset. I want to see live data. I want
Yeah.
to. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's great for the practitioner. I think it's great for the speed of money to employees. There's no reason why pay cycles really ought to be a month long. There's no reason why we should be, processing payroll all night and through the evening in order to get it out the door. The continuous calculation, the always on, always sort of processing nature and automated nature, straight through processing nature is fundamentally going to just create more frictionless processing. And I really love it. I think it's a blessing for the payroll practitioner to not be processing payroll all the time. It's just happening and you're addressing the anomalies and working on these value added things that you're doing, right? Strategizing for your business and making, taking them forward in progress. So I love it. I think it's good stuff. Now the media would have you believe it's going to end the payroll profession and careers. And we all know that's insane, right? There's so much that goes on in payroll and payroll is needed for above and beyond just clicking a button or processing payroll. So yeah, I love it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think it actually makes it even more, it elevates the payroll profession, because when you get to the point where you're working with this always on
Yeah.
data, then you don't have, things like freeze periods anymore where the world stands still and you can go ahead and press a button safely, right? You have to actually really be interacting with the data and with the processes and the adjustments and everything that's happening. And in my mind, it kind of elevates everything that you have to do as a payroll practitioner.
Everything's happening in the flow of work now, right? It's being presented in the flow of work. Why not pay? It should be the same thing, right? It should be a unique experience that helps you, as an employee reach their goals and reach their potential and handle their health, wealth, and retirement, hopefully. So I love it. Money 2020 really, really reinforced for me the impact that fintech's going to have on both payroll, but also just the experience for the employee and for people getting access to money. It's not equal, as we know, and I think it's going to make things a lot more level the playing field for a lot of folks.
Yeah, what else there's, Celia? I know Pete just said, access to money, and I think you'd made some mention to payment rails and other things. Got other things in your bag of goodies that are exciting to you going forward?
So I think there are maybe two more things or so that kind of I try to keep tabs on and see what kind of industry developments there is. Absolutely, one thing is anything that touches upon analytics. So one piece that I kind of try to see is what kind of efficiency can we drive internally within our team. Reconciliation tools overall, I've seen some large launches in 2023, especially in the mid-year, of new technology. I want to see more. I want to see predictive analytics pop in. I hope we're together also with the EU pay transparency directives. I hope this is going to be again a catalyst maybe for developing those reporting capabilities. I'd like to see that data to be maybe more live and kind of not only used for strategic purposes but also maybe to supplement operational validations. So absolutely looking at reporting and analytics.
Yeah, that's huge. That's the power, right? I mean, it goes without saying the data payroll has is the key, and I'm excited to see that data gets paired and synergized with other organizational, operational data, business data. I think there's so much they can do to together. So exciting stuff, and that's what you're seeing all the products go towards right now. The generative is here. I think we're going to see that predictive capability come a lot faster.
So, Celia, I just have another question here. Like, with all this cool stuff going on, I'm wondering what you think about the global payroll model. I mean, is it something that's really catching on, or is it just folks in the industry or providers in the industry that just keep talking about it, waiting to see if it actually pans out and happens? Where do you feel this is all headed?
I think it should be catching on because there are a lot of tangible gains. And if not, maybe a global payroll model, at least a consolidated payroll model from an organizational standpoint. Again, maybe looking at regional or cluster people, process, system perspective. So I think the biggest benefit from a global or regional model is having a standardized employee experience. Of course, we spoke about this earlier, but enablement of reporting and analytics. I think there's a little bit even more to that. I think we can have higher price efficiencies simply because we have larger scale. And I think we protect ourselves then as a company, typically in contracts, as we have higher limits of liability. And all in all, I would say that kind of global or regional models also help, as we've spoken, around streamlined processes and really creating those, well, plans for people and having wider career paths across our team. So it's really limiting any people dependencies that we may have. So I think there's a lot to it, and I think it should be catching on if it's not catching on.
Yeah, that's very well said, Sylvia. I would just add to that to say that it's doable, right? Global payroll transformation is possible. Julie, you're out there living it every day. I'm seeing the cases myself, interviewing folks and listening to their stories. And the good news is, I think the solutions are more powerful, they're more flexible, and they're more capable than ever before to handle this. So, yeah, go get out there and get going, get on your path, and start with a strategy and listen to Sylvia and do it. You can do it. It's possible.
It's possible. Agreed.
It is very possible.
Awesome. Well, I think that might be a wrap for today.
All
I
right.
mean, we could talk global payroll all day long. It's something I love to geek out over, and you've certainly satisfied, that itch for me, Sylvia. I love learning from you and seeing what you're seeing from your perspective. So thank you for spending the time with us. It's great.
Thanks so much for the great conversation. It's been awesome to speak.
Yeah, thanks so much. Appreciate you coming on, Sylvia, and we will be back very soon.
Thanks so much.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.